Thank you, Sharon, as always. Sharon and I have had a very interesting friendship since we very first met. And thankfully, she's been not just a wonderful friend, but we've shared so many positive moments and also some very difficult moments in terms of, things that have happened in my life at the time. And Sharon's been very present and very supportive. And one of those moments actually happened last year on the 24th of August when Sharon was over in the UK working with the ISF, I believe it was. And very sadly, we were due to meet on that day, and we'd kind of pre-arranged a date that I was to visit. And on that day, I had the news that a very dear friend of mine had passed away. A very dear friend that I'd known from the beginning of my awareness of the spirit world. So we're talking 31, 32 years of friendship. And I want to talk a little bit about her, if I can, just to kind of lead into what I'm kind of inspired to talk about in terms of for everybody's benefit, really, is that June was an interesting character, challenging at times, but always loving and always supportive without question. And she had lots of health issues, which I think many of us, some people seem very blessed that they have no issues with health all their life. And some people, sadly, have lots of health issues. And sadly, June was one of those people that had terrible health issues throughout all of her life. And so consequently, for the 31, 32 years that I knew her, every year she would announce that this would be her last. Every single year. And of course, she always bounced back. She was incredibly hardy, very tenacious, incredibly stubborn. And so she desired to keep going, and at the same time having this awareness that she was going to pass. And so, whenever we would hear that conversation yearly, and sometimes more than twice or three times yearly, we'd all raise our eyebrows in a kind of, okay, here we go again. And so she survived every year. She came through every surgery, through various bits of her body being removed. She was still going to survive. And so a couple of weeks before her passing, she said this again: I'm not going to be here for long. But she started to talk about how she had been seeing the spirit world. Now, June was a medium and had been a phenomenal medium for as long as I'd known her. So it wasn't unusual that we would talk about the spirit world. A big part of our friendship was really about our connection to the spirit world and our experiences of it and all the things that go with being a medium. So it wasn't unusual to speak about the spirit world. But what was unusual about it is that June was very much how I am as a medium. I work when I'm in that space to work, and when I'm not working, I'm Darren. And so June was very much like that. And so in that kind of conversation that followed on, I'm not going to be here, she would start to tell me about how she'd been seeing the spirit world everywhere. She was seeing her loved ones. She was seeing her friends. She was walking through a supermarket and seeing other people's loved ones and friends. And so the spirit world were very real to her, which was not uncommon. But what was uncommon is the fact that they were present constantly in her awareness. And as I heard her say that, I had a sense within me that I could believe her this time when she said it was her time. Because I know from my own understanding of this work is that when we are moving to that place of reconnecting to the other world in a way of losing our physicality, that world becomes much more available to us. That world is much more real to us, because in many respects, we're actually living in the spirit world much more as the physical body starts to move away from, this reality. So there was a recognition within me that I could believe her this time. And I think I'm telling this story because I think this is a very common thing for many people who've been with their loved ones a week or 2 weeks before their passing and have had this awareness of, conversations that I've seen my dad, I've seen my mom, somebody's come to visit me, I've had a dream. These are very common and very real things. And they're not just limited to people who have this understanding that we all share. They're not limited to people who are particularly religious. They're not limited to people who are spiritualists or spiritual by nature. Many people, even people who might describe themselves as atheists or disbelievers, also have these experiences. And so on the 24th of August last year, when June finally passed away, and I had the call actually as I was on my way to visit Sharon and Rosemary up in Scarborough, it wasn't a surprise. And yet at the same time, like every one of us, we go through those sadnesses and those griefs and those letting go processes, which are necessary for our growth and evolution, and also necessary for June's evolution, so that she can reunite to that place where she is at home, as we all will do eventually. But it's really made me think about when many people talk about the spirit world and they talk about where is the spirit world and how do we know that there's a spirit world and where is it, I want just to put forward the thought that we are all in the spirit world already, that we're already there. That, many people talk about mediumship in terms of the body dies and we go somewhere. But really what I want to consider is that we're already there, that we're operating as physical beings right now that have thoughts and feelings and memories and emotions and sadnesses and joys. But we also are a spiritual being that's already operating in that world. And so when we start to identify with that thought that we're more than just physicality, that world becomes a little bit more closer in our understanding. And the thing that keeps us separate from it is our mind, isn't it? Is the beliefs that we have, the fears that we have, all those things that we are kind of told should and shouldn't happen, whether that be through religion, through ancestry, through Netflix even. We have all these thoughts about how close the spirit world is to us. But ultimately, the experience of June's passing really made me recognize the closeness of the spirit world. And as her physicality, like many people's physicality, starts to wane, the other world became more available to her. And it always is available to us. It's really not just, kind of kept for those moments that before we lose our physical breath, that we are already there. There is no going anywhere. We're just revealed into the naturalness of who we really are. And so I'd like you to all imagine that right now, an ocean. And I want you to all to imagine that each one of us, a bucket, we represent a bucket of that ocean. So as we tip the bucket in, we catch that ocean, we are held by a physical form of the bucket. And that if we were to dye the contents of that seawater with your individuality, with your identity, with your thoughts, your personality, your feelings, and that dye is your uniqueness, held by the physicality of that bucket, but still a part of God, still a part of that universe, still a part of something bigger, it would make sense that we are both physicality and spiritual energy. We are both things existing in the same place at the same time. And then what happens is that as we grow older, as the body decays, as the bucket becomes less firm, that soul that we are, the individuality, starts to then go back into the ocean. The water gets released. We start to emerge, re-emerge back into that greater power that we all are. And so what mediums do is they somehow are able to move beyond the limitations of the bucket. They're able to move beyond the limitations of the dye-filled identity that we all are, and that we are all always connected to that power greater than us. We're already there. And so it was fascinating to me to have that understanding that June being released isn't about her going anywhere. It was really just about her being revealed back into the ocean from whence she came, as we all will be eventually. And it then made me think about how the consciousness that we are is really not limited by anything, is it? Unless we believe we're limited, we never are. And so with this awareness that we're already connected to something greater, we're already connected to each other because we are all the same stuff, all things then start to become available to us. We start to connect more with one another on this level. We start to be curious about the connectedness rather than the disconnectedness that the ego talks about. We start to identify with humanity. We start to identify by being empathic, by being curious, by being interested in anything separate to us, anything other than us, but not in a way that divides us, but in a way that connects us. And so we're looking at connectedness. We're looking at that sense that we are all equal, that we all belong to one another. And that is extended to those in the other world as well. That's extended to our loved ones, our mums, our dads, our brothers, our friends who've gone on before us. They are available to us. They're just right here. When people say, where is the spirit world? I say, wherever you are, the spirit world is, because you cannot be separate from it. It runs through you. It runs through your very being. Who you are is spirit. And as such, each one of you on this screen, on some vibrational, spiritual, energetic level, are connected to one another. And so one of the things I realized through the passing of June, and really, that my kind of awareness has grown massively since her passing, is that when we love somebody, we take a part of them energetically into us. They become a part of who we are. And when they become a part of who we are, we can't hurt them without hurting ourselves. We can't be hurt without hurting the other person. And so many of us identify with a person, we love a person, we'll say, I love a person. And really what's happening is we become energetically a part of each other. And so what I feel, you feel, your pain is my pain. And some people have that same identification process with their car or their job or, I don't know, their cat, whatever that might be. But we take on a part of the energy of the other. And what that does, it taps us into the connectedness of us all. It taps us into the fact that there is no separateness. There is no division. And even death doesn't divide us, because once we recognize that connectedness is innate, it's part of who we are, there can never be separateness. There can never be loneliness. There can never be division. They can never be them and us. There can never be comparison, because we operate from a place of equality. We operate from a place of connectedness, of sameness. And so when that bucket becomes broken and damaged and eventually becomes no use, that the identity that we are becomes still a part of the greater whole. It's still available. The consciousness is not limited by form in any way. And I had a fascinating story, which I wanted to share with you, which really just illustrated that, but actually more about the beginning of life, because my mum and dad live in a very small cul-de-sac, a little close, and they've always lived there as long as I've been in the world. But as a child, I used to always have this anxiety about a particular gate that I had to pass to get home. And as I was walking around the corner to enter my parents' street, I would always feel very stressed. And the thought that I had was always, I need to run past that gate because the little boy with Down syndrome will jump out at me. Now, I'd lived there all my life. There had never been anybody I knew of that had Down syndrome that lived at that address. So it was a strange thought to have. It was a strange thought to have recurring, but also to have this really strong sense of fear or anxiety about that. And so I just happened to mention it to my mum one day, many, many years later. And she said, well, that's strange, because when I was pregnant with you, there was a family who lived at that address and they had a son who had Down syndrome. And whilst I was pregnant with you, one summer's day, she was in her own little world, walking home from the shops, and the little boy jumped out at her and scared her. So much so that she dropped the shopping. Now I'm sat in the soup of her consciousness, in her physical form, in her body, absorbing everything that she is experiencing and feeling, and every emotion that runs through her runs through me. The connectedness was present. And somehow that experience filtered into my psyche and into my being, that it became a part of who I am in that moment. And many years later, with no conscious understanding or awareness of why I'm thinking that, I then found out that that experience happened, but not to me. And so there is this connectedness, there is this sense of connection that we all have, that we're all influenced by the thoughts and the emotions of one another. And so once we can accept this connectedness, and I talk about this in a way because I want us to start to recognize the absence of division. It's really about recognizing that there is nothing that separates us other than our beliefs and the crazy ego that we all have. But once we enter into this arena, this spiritual arena, it ceases to be about the singular. It ceases to be about the them and us. It should cease to be about more than, less than, and should be about connection, belonging, identification with another, because again, as I love you, I love me, and vice versa. And so June's passing was one of the most painful, difficult things that I've ever had to experience. And thankfully, Sharon and Rosemary and Richard were there at that moment to support me through that. But her passing, like for many of us, helps us to understand life a little bit differently. And certainly throughout my understanding of this work, she brought to my awareness an experience that I could never have had without her passing. And so there is a blessing in that. And although as painful as it is for many of us that relive on a day-to-day basis the passing of our loved ones, but what can we learn from that? Can we look at how it moves us, how it elevates us, how it transports us into a level of understanding that we would not have experienced before? I absolutely believe, and from my experience know, that every experience we ever have in our lives is designed to take us higher, not lower, even though it might feel that way. But when we can look back at what we've experienced and look back at it through spiritual eyes rather than the physical eyes that the ego relies upon, we start to recognize that as a spiritual being that is growing, that is evolving, that is forever wanting to be more, everything is designed to take us higher. Everything is designed to elevate us and everybody that comes into contact, because as we connect to one another, I can't be elevated unless you're elevated. I can't grow unless you grow. And so we have a spiritual responsibility to support each other in our growth, in our understanding, in our elevation. And when we can start to recognize that, then we can evolve as a species, as a nation, as a world. And one of the things I think that helps us to do that is empathy. Empathy is a wonderful bridge that moves us from the ego into the heart, into the soul. Because with empathy, I'm curious about your experience, separate to my own. I'm curious about who you are. I'm curious about the connectedness between us. I'm curious. And so when we can start to look through life, look at life in very curious ways and look at people, and there are some very curious people, don't misunderstand me. There are curious people in the world, but let's be curious about the curiousness. Let's be curious about what makes people different, because every experience we ever have has helped to form a part of our identity, a part of who we are. And if we can choose to lean into that with a curious nature and to be empathic, to understand that every experience is designed to take us higher, even if it doesn't look like that at the time, then we start to grow. And whether that person or that experience is what you would want or you would like for yourselves or for them is irrelevant. Every experience is designed to take them higher. And I have to look at life, and I would suggest we try to look at life in a way that however it looks to us, that person is doing the best that they can. In that moment that June yearly told us she's going to not make it this year, what she's really saying is, see me. What she's really saying is, I'm here. She's not talking about her death. She's not talking about leaving. She's saying, notice that I'm here. Notice that I'm present. Notice that this matters. And maybe on some level, she was trying to extract from me some level of care or connectedness that I didn't see at that time. I dismissed it. But it was when she started to talk about the reality of the world that she was in that I started to hear what she was saying. I was starting to recognize and resonate with what she was feeling. And so I would say to you, let's not wait until it's that time that our loved ones pass away. Let's not wait until we hear the signs of you're going to pass away, to just hear beneath the surface. Listen to what's going on beneath the surface of our conversations, and not just listen with our ears, but listen with our heart. Be curious about what that might mean, what might be going on, what that might be feeling like for somebody else. Be empathic, because when we start to look at people from a very empathic place, we start to get a window into their reality. We start to lose ourselves. And many times I talk about this in mediumship unfoldment, is really good mediums are able to lose themselves. And I don't mean that permanently, but in that moment of connected to the other world, they're losing the identity that they are, and they're offering their awareness to the other world. They're curious. So if we can start to look at the people in our world from an empathic stance, being curious about who they are and why they are, living and being who they are in that moment, then I think we have a chance to start to open up emotionally, spiritually, vibrationally to that connectedness that really keeps us all together, whether we realize it or not. Thank you for listening.